Hello, everyone. It's Kate Stillman with the Yogahealer Podcast, and I'm here with Angus Nelson, who I serendipitously met at, we were both, I think, in speakers at Social Media Marketing World years ago, and we met at a party for the speakers, and then we recently became back in touch because I was going to Lisbon when I noticed on social media you were moving your family to Lisbon, and I was like, that's funny and interesting. And then we were there at the same time. We didn't connect, but it got us back into messaging. And then fast forward like a month after that, and my husband has signed up to coach with you, and we've been looking for a coach for him for a very long time. So we'll follow up on the results of that at a later episode.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. So I've been leading transformational journeys for 20 years. And most of the people attracted to that, because I've had very I thought they've been open to men, right? And we've had men along the way at about a 5% to 95% ratio, male to female split. Some courses up to 10%. My branding's not pink and purple, it's green. It was in the past, now it's metallics. So in any case, one of the number one, I would say, observations / transformation / you could say complaints at lower levels is that, the women who are evolving is like, why are the men not coming? Why are men not signing up for coaching? Why are men not signing up for, and then simultaneously, I'm in all these business trainings because I've basically connected my purpose and ambition around that purpose to impact, which to me is measured. One of the metrics is dollars. So that led me to business trainings pretty early on in my game. And the more involved I got in business trainings, and once my business passed $1 million in revenue a couple of years ago, maybe 5 years ago, it was like, there's more men. I mean, only 2% of female-owned businesses in the United States make it to $1 million. So just statistically, they're not there. And then if they have kids and they're running a successful business, they're just not going to trainings, right? So I'm like, men's world, like that's my colleague life. Like my colleague mastermind group is all men and me. And this is kind of and most of my business friends are male friends. And then in my work world where I'm like guiding the transformation in career goals, in financial goals, in health goals, like all that work that's really non-gender specific at all. Like everyone has a body, everyone has to deal with money, everyone has a calendar. I'm at like 90 to 95% women. And the women are like leaving their relationships left and right because the men won't come along, or they're negotiating with stagnation. And in that negotiation with stagnation, they're giving up certain things for other things that have, or they're in the mix of like, I don't know. So Angus is a man on a mission. He's a high performance coach for men. He's one of America's top performance strategists and founder of Evolve Men Coaching. He takes years of best practices from advising Fortune 500 leaders to help ambitious men create more freedom, fulfillment, and focused intent so that they can make the impact in the world they were designed for. Okay, I've got one more thing to say, and then I'm going to give you the mic for as long as you want. So the other thing I want to say is I just got off a conversation, and I've had some very interesting conversations today with a healer, very high-level healer, also guiding transformational journeys using the business model that we teach at Wellness Pro Academy. She's had dynamic success and yada, yada. And her core mission, her next core mission, and I really think this ties into the conversation with you, is like reconnecting women with joy. And my sense is that when a man can source some joy from a woman, like a lot happens.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to throw that in the mix and give you the mic, and you can talk about whatever you want.
Kate, thank you. Where to start? You opened up a can of worms on so many levels. The first thing I think I would love to address, is just the sick irony of the fact that men desperately need help on so many areas in their lives on a personal nature, but we find our validation in a professional nature. And we refuse or are unopen to share weakness, vulnerability, transparency, because we believe on some level in our business structure someone somewhere, whether it's a colleague, whether it's, our competition, someone's going to weaponize any kind of weakness that we show. And so there's this weird underlying, element to a lot of the way, particularly, high performing men who I work with, they are falling numb. They're getting bored. They're getting all these different emotional things because something stopped. And you said this, joy, stopped giving them joy. One of my favorite testimonies or feedback is when a guy says, I cannot believe how happy I am. To me, that's like the highest compliment. And it's not that we pursue happiness because that's going to be fleeting. You're going to be chasing that all the time. It's rather filling your life with the things that naturally and effervescently give you happiness, give you joy. It's the natural byproduct of doing things that are aligned, doing things that feed your passions, your soul, your purpose, your being. When we find that, happiness is kind of an indicator that you're on the right track. Is that a good place to start?
Yeah, totally.
When you
so what's part of the problem when we live in like our culture is so, it's in our economy, so, short-term cycle profit driven. And then there's a lot of narratives, like man as soldier, man as earner, where it's all in this paradigm context that's like sacrificing the earth and sacrificing their own ability to connect with purpose. Mm-hmm. That leads to happiness. So if we just said like, okay, purpose leads to happiness, period. And happiness doesn't necessarily lead to purpose. Like it can be a two-way street, but it doesn't start with pursuing happiness. It starts with pursuing purpose. But we live in a global cultural economic paradigm that's totally leading men to pursue profit over purpose. And it's not like their women or families aren't demanding that of them to earn either. So it's not like it's,
it's an underlying thing that everything in a man's life oftentimes, and we're speaking in obvious, very generalized stereotypes. So just caveat that.
Yeah.
But we are based on performance. And a man conceptually embraces that for whatever reason, it's about performance. And so everything about our lives becomes around how good or how compared we are to those around us. And so a man, from a psychological realm, just like everything else, we attract what we are. And so if we're trying to pursue these great and mighty things, what we find is those great and mighty things are filled with emptiness because we're doing them out of the pursuit of validation, doing them from the ambition that once I get this thing, then it will give me some secondary gain. I get this money, I will be, powerful. I get this girl, I'll be sexy. I get this, fill in the blank. They go for the thing with the expectation it will bring them some kind of internal substance. And so it's this ambition that these men are following and chasing over and over and over again, expecting that they're going to get fulfilled, satisfied, significant, meaning. And it's not true. All of those things are just a pursuit of things. And so we're always in this place of operating from deficit and lack. And so there's a negative void in that. And so now you bring that into the corporate world, the political world, or anything of that nature. And this is a dog eat dog. Everybody's out to get each other. And if you want to get ahead, you've got to pull somebody down. And we're clamoring over the corporate ladder, clamoring over, the competition. And here comes this performance, go, 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 go. And what we have is the people rising to the top in many realms are shameless and soulless. Because that's what you need.
I could name a few.
Right?
Right?
And so our leadership in politics, our leadership in corporate, our leadership in so many areas of our lives, you go through the list, education and politics and da-da-da-da-da. It's filled with people who are soulless and void. And now they, on many times, start with the right reasons, but some way, somehow they get chewed up. And so we have healthy men and women who will never want or desire those roles because they know what they would have to subject themselves or their family, their reputation, or their character to.
Yeah.
And so we're left in these vacuums where those that rise to the top are the weakest of the species.
Wow.
And so this is why Evolved Men is here, is we are building men who have this character and this nature and this fortitude, who have nothing to gain, nothing to prove, and nothing to lose. Because they know who they are and they can stand on their own 2 feet, not dictated by the whims of other people's, objective observations or critiques. It's because if you know who you are, it doesn't matter what other people think.
Yeah.
And if you know what you're for, even more powerful.
Yeah. Well, and it's tied, right? I mean, there's a basic teaching in Ayurveda. The definition of health is phasta. It means seated in the self. That's the definition of health. So when you think of definition of health in allopathic medicine, which is practiced everywhere globally now, is absence of disease. That's a really different definition than seated in the self. Because when you're seated in the self, you know what you're doing and why you're doing it. So you go from consumer to creator. You go from consumer to citizen, and then that changes reality.
Come on.
Okay, so let's.
By the way, I will tell you this too. Like, the biggest thing I love to tell my guys is everything I'm going to teach you has nothing to do with anything external. You won't have to work harder, do harder, be harder. Let me rephrase that. You don't have to do all these things externally, but rather the being is a natural expression of source and supply.
So how much is that initially like overcoming numbness or passive? It's like if we look at the masculine, like the female goes into hyperactivity, the male goes into the opposite of that on the archetypal mythological level, right? So it's more of like the numbing, the isolation. And so how much of that activation of the unnumbing and the feeling and connecting words with sensations and emotions and articulation, how much is that in the beginning of your work with men?
I don't bother with a lot of that because you can't lure a man with, let's talk about feelings.
Well, I'm not even saying, okay, what about feeling? Like how many of them can feel? Like, are they feeling or are they numb?
Well, it's a very different, man with a different vibe. So again, we're speaking in incredible generalities.
Yeah.
But the majority of men that I work with on an Enneagram, if you're familiar with the Enneagram,
Yes.
The majority of guys I work with are 1s, 3s, and 5s. And then I get 7 wing 8s and I get 2 wing 3s. Like that's like the vast majority of probably 85% of people I work, or of men I work with.
Yeah.
So they're built on that high performance scale, and they're go. When I say, that they're not feeling or they're going numb or, all these other things, it's because that pursuit has brought them to a place of that wanting to achieve in order to attain. Whatever that is. And so if you focus on the numbness, if you focus on the avoidance, if you focus on all of those characteristics, you're still missing the thing that's supposed to supplant that. So I spend all my time going in the opposite, is rebuilding the identity of how a man sees himself.
Wow. Yeah.
At a core nature, until a man knows who he really is, he can never become or to be anything about outside of that. And so you actually fill the vacuum that's within them with substance.
Okay, right? So then what are the emotions that arise as a man sees himself? I would just rephrase, because I think it's the same question.
So if you fill a man with fulfillment, satisfaction, right? Suddenly they're in peace. Suddenly they're not performing and exhausting themselves. So now they have joy. So we try to get to the emotion, and you can't start at the emotion. You have to start at the identity, the core. And so a lot of my work in that first, especially the first movement I do with my men, every guy that comes with, I don't commit to anything over 3 months. I don't know if you like me. I don't know if I like you. So, we're going to do this dance at first. And that's the heavy lift. That's all the foundational stuff. and realigning how they see themselves, because we're all filled with these, can I cuss on this show? I don't know if
Sure.
I can. These bullshit stories.
Yeah.
And until you reframe the bullshit stories that everyone has, but in particular for men, we build those performance, mindsets according to some bullshit story that someone either inflicted or assumed upon us, whether it
Yeah.
was a coach, whether it was a parent, whether it was a teacher, whether it was a friend. Somebody said something and it left a wound, it left a scar, it left a need, it left a void. And so these men are in this constant pursuit to go beyond that. And it can be around money, it can be around their value, it can be around their person. All that we do is to reframe what are those stories, because those stories are driving behavior.
Yeah.
Behavior is built in a belief.
Yeah.
And so once we reverse engineer this stuff, we're like, oh, this is why I do this thing.
Yeah.
Now you start to give words to the avoidance. You give words to the numbing. You give words to all those procrastination and all these other behaviors.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, shit. Now what? And it's like, okay, what if we give you a new story? And so I work with these men to create these new stories,
Mm-hmm.
and they start to see themselves in a new way. And again, this is an internal work.
Mm-hmm.
So from that, we build on a structure like, okay, so this is who you are. What is what you are here to do? And we put together a plan. Like, I am here to do this, because I base it on the oracles of the UK. I'm not sure if you know about these sirens that came around in the mid 90s. They came out of nowhere. They're called the Spice Girls. And they said, tell me what you want, what you really, really want. That was the challenge that was faced in the mid 90s that we have struggled with for centuries. What do you really want? Because most men are chasing after something they think somebody else wants. They're chasing after their spouse, their partner, their colleagues, their business, their investors, their board, their all these different people.
Yeah.
They're just trying to make everyone happy, because if I can just keep everybody else happy, maybe I'll be happy too.
Yeah.
And so men are built on this place of shouldering with their strength, of building and supporting with their strength. It's kind of this masculine thing, but we've misappropriated it into places of power and pursuit for these accolades, instead of being this place where we support and we grow the things around us. We nurture things around us out of that strength. And so where the poison is we get a partner and we're like, I just wanted you to be happy. And we'll bend over backwards to make sure that our partner has the money they need, or has the dream they want to build, or has the house they were supposed to have, or builds the nest and has the kids and has the car and has all the things. And at the end of the day, the man is never actually doing the things that he wants. He doesn't even know what he wants. He's been doing all this stuff for everyone else, doing Johnny the monkey boy, freaking Pinocchio on the end of Geppetto's strings. And we're like, well, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing anymore. Then comes midlife crisis, because their identity has been wrapped up into all these external things.
Yeah. 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 So in Tantra is the evolution of yoga philosophy. First, there was classical yoga. There's pre-classical, pre-Vedas, Vedas, pre-classical, classical, Advaita Vedanta. Tantra rolls in about 880. Okay. And it goes strong. It's arguably strongest right now. So Tantra has the most basic concept of, first teaching is, who am I? Right? Inquiry practice. Second teaching is, what do I want? Right. And that's right where you've landed in the work. And this is the work of every human being. And you're doing the work with men, and that awakening of desire is visceral, it's cerebral, it's every level. It's biological. Excellent. So what happens in a man's life as he figures out the next level of, this is who I am and this is what I want?
Well, again, Generalizations, every man's going to be different.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing is, what is the expression of source and supply in your life? So for one man, that might look like, I'm suddenly showing up present for the people I love. And their spouse, their partner says, oh my gosh, I can't believe, like, you actually looked me in the eyes for the entire conversation. You didn't look at your damn phone. You know, it's the kid who notices, like, oh my gosh, like, dad, you played cards with me. You played a game with me. I love you, dad. Like, that's so powerful. They get to their workplace and suddenly they're saying, you know what? I'm a bit of a micromanager, or I am trying to hold all the cards. I am my own bottleneck to this company.
Yeah.
I need to delegate this stuff away. I'm stealing from my team. I'm stealing from my time. I'm stealing from my energy. So suddenly they're replacing, they're hiring, they're, delegating, they're doing all these things because the recognition is, I've been doing all these things because I felt like I was the only one who could.
Yeah.
And they start to let go of that because their identity now is intact. It's no longer the performance. And they
Yeah.
can start bringing in and letting go and all these different, things that they otherwise couldn't do. The other component of this is the level of compassion and empathy they have for those around them, because now they have empathy for themselves. They've been set free. And when you recognize how bound you've been and how you've been in your own way over and over and over again, you start to realize, like, I was believing my own bullshit stories. Who else is believing theirs?
Yeah.
Right?
Everyone.
It gives you this crazy thing called self-awareness.
Yeah. It was funny. I'm laughing because, we were just talking before we pressed record about like my Euro tour with my daughter, who's 14 and a half, and we're hanging out on rooftop bars in Madrid at midnight. And I'm like trying to break the box. I'm trying to get her out of the box in a way. And we're hanging out with my buddy he's like close to 30. He's made millions and he's an entrepreneur. He had a shit childhood. And anyways, like he's like, has a totally different even perspective of the box of like, who are we when we're free? Like, who am I? What do I want? Right. And like the social programming that happens. I mean, this kid of mine has grown up with me. I mean, she had a home birth. Like, we've been at the hip for, the whole gig. And I'm pretty out of the box.
Yeah.
And still, like, the box is right there. And so when we get out of that, like, there's so many more possibilities. There's so many more opportunities. And those opportunities we can't even notice when we're in it. Like, they're just not even on the radar because we're so bogged down in the old personality and the old, who does the world need me to be? I better fit into that. So what do you find with men in terms of, like, as they really wake up to, as the creator, right? To the, as creator citizen, as creator lover, as creator father, as, they wake up to, like, oh wait, I am the divine. Like, I can shape this game.
It's a practice, right? So sometimes it's 2 step forward, 1 step back. That's all new. But once the foundation has been set, now we have context to have the conversation. So like I said, we do that first, 3 months of working together. So if we work on with each other, usually between 6 to 8 months, it'll cycle. And now there's a new thing, right?
Yeah.
Because all of
New
life
layer.
is filled with challenge and it's calling you to these higher places. And so just to kind of, back up just a second, is one of the things I teach about is, what you hear about, you think about, you talk about, you bring about. These are our computer brains of ours, our soul, our energy, everything kind of works in the same kind of metaphor. Well, in that same way, your brain loves to experience equilibrium. It wants to experience externally what you believe about yourself internally. And so all of that identity shifting that we do in the beginning now all of a sudden brings about these new opportunities, because now you want to attract, your brain wants this equilibrium to attract these higher level, higher frequency relationships, experiences, and opportunities because
Yeah.
you've upgraded yourself,
Yeah.
now upgrading your environment.
Resonance, right? Like you've changed. So yeah.
So out of that resonance now comes resistance because your subconscious says, are you sure this
Yeah.
is where we're supposed to be? Are you sure this is the kind of people
Yeah.
we should hang out with? Are you sure this is the kind of money I make? And now comes this context of, do I deserve, am I worthy, and do I have what it takes? So these are these psychological
Yeah. All the
proof
doubt.
points
Yeah.
comes in, right? And so now at your new levels, new devils, we call that the resistance.
Yeah.
So now we go back to the programming. What's the identity? I go into my data, and I start building new understandings of myself.
Mhm.
And so that new understanding now upgrades my internal operating system. And now I can walk into these greater opportunities, these greater experiences, these greater relationships. And it's a systematic thing that just happens over and over. And we continually upgrade our operating system so that we can experience these greater levels of self.
Yeah.
And it's when we forget to do that or when we stop doing that, that's when things get kind of wonky because you have knowledge, you have understanding, but you don't have experience. You don't have the tangibility of it. Like, but I know all these things. It's like, but let's go back to the basics. Are you applying what you know?
Yeah.
It's no different than so many other areas of our life. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
this level of intention and this level of clarity and presence that we always have to maintain to keep ourselves growing. You said something really interesting, being in the box. It's like, I've been doing this for 20 years. My kid's been by my side. She should be as free and open as I. And what we don't realize, even in your world, you've created a box,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I call these the belief boxes. And so everything outside that belief box seems strange and foreign. And so anytime we step out of that, our subconscious says, I don't know about that. And
Yeah.
so it's almost as if you're, again, to stick with the box metaphor, it's like you're reaching through the window of the box to grab a new truth and pulling on it to actually expand the box to now contain the new truth.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Have you read Liminal Thinking by Dave Gray? He's a really good graphic for.
Ah,
Yeah, he's a
that's
really good graphic on. Yeah, it's a beautiful book. We have an interview on it on my show. I worship at the feet of Dave Gray in terms of his. He's the one who came up with the empathy map, Angus.
mm,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
massive thought leader in design thinking and business strategy. Just a great thinker, and he goes through how when you expand your experience, you're going to expand your beliefs, and you're just yeah. So yes, okay. So
I'm
this
reading,
I want to
right
go.
now I'm reading Ray Dalio,
Oh,
Principles.
principles. Yeah, good. So yeah, okay. So we can lead with principles. So if we just like back way up into like men and women and archetypes, so we have divine masculine and divine feminine, and then we bring in midlife crises, which play out in men's and women's psyches and bodies differently, and really pull on the archetypes. There's a pattern that we see in men, successful men, and by successful men in modern culture, what that more or less means is that you can buy what you want. I'll just put it that way. I would say, like, and I'm just going to categorize this. So you can buy women, you can buy sex, you can buy toys, you can buy experiences, and around midlife, when a man's maturated, that's been on a power track, like they should have a lot of resources to be able to buy what they want. Okay, so for women have been on a different, I mean, women who've made themselves, like, women who, like, she's one of the boys. And I'll somewhat put myself in this category, although I've had a healer track on that, which has been highly unique. So unless the woman's willing to play the man's game, she has a pretty different path. Either way, women's physiologically, their physiology changes, and either they go through a power cycle in perimenopause, or they go into a degenerative cycle where, I mean, 1 in 3 women in the Western world get their uterus removed. So they like literally lose their womb, where the womb is the power source in the female body. And there's a lot of intelligence with symptomology that awakens them. So women have a lot of a gift in both monthly cycles and then also in the midlife physiological power upgrade invitation. And that often, well, I find it separates a lot of relationships where either like a man doesn't want to deal with a maturated woman because he doesn't want to maturate himself. And so the relationship ends and then he just buys his next relationship, essentially providing a roof over someone else's head who's maybe a lot younger or a lot less mature and won't demand his maturation. And I obviously speaking in massive archetypal meets modern culture meta level, or the man decides to go on his own journey into what you said, like, who am I? What do I want? How will I show up as that and create my future? And I still have all the resources. I still have all the money, right? It's a very important thing to recognize. Like, I still have all my past lessons learned now as arrows in my quiver. So I'm just going to toss the ball over the net with that and whatever you want to say to any of it.
Oh my gosh, there's so much in there. So here's another facet to this complicated conversation. Well, there's two things that jump out at me. One is, trauma and healthiness, right? Just in general, psychologically, all of us experience some level of trauma throughout our lives, how we grew up, is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it environment? Whatever way our families raise. And then as we grow up, we start to discover some of that stuff. And then oftentimes what happens is in one side of the relationship, one will choose to get healthier and they'll start doing the work, whether it's spiritual or whether it's psychological. They'll get, counseling or a therapist or a coach, or, they'll read these books or attend these events, and they'll go through these retreats, all these different things where one party will seek health.
Yeah.
The other one gets left behind and either chooses to cast stones. Who do you think you are? You're so goody two shoes now. You're all these things, because they've degenerated into hanging on to what they've always known. The chaos, the pain, the weakness, the deficit.
I just want to pause. Why do you say gets left behind versus like digs their heels in? Because to me, that's a very victimization perspective that they're getting left behind.
Mm-hmm. I'd say it's an and both, because some people don't know what they don't know. And so it's ignorance. They actually don't know that there's a better way. So when you look at the metaphor of Neo and the Matrix, you have everybody is status quo. And then here you take this pill and suddenly you raise to this other consciousness. I believe that there is a mass metaphor in our world, because you and I could say, hey, we have a different consciousness than a lot of other people. When we're walking down the street, we're like, these other people are in a cloud. They just don't know. They're in ignorance. In the same way, I believe in couples and in psychology, sometimes they just don't know that there's a different way. They simply do not know. And it takes compassion and empathy and patience to woo them through that transition to understand, hey, you're not broken. You're not wrong. There's simply another way. And if you'll stay with me, I can show you. Like, this is the approach that a lot of people are not taking. We think that you're a grown ass man. You're a grown ass woman. You should figure this out.
Totally.
Like, if you don't have the tools, if you don't have like the narrative of, let's get really raw and say, well, poverty is not a matter of opportunity. Poverty is a matter of ignorance.
Yeah.
And so we can't blame someone for being in poverty if they don't know that there's another way. In the same way, emotionally, people have a impoverished mindset, an impoverished capacity. And so they don't know how to act differently. So that's why I say there's this other context. It doesn't make them a victim. It's simply a tool they were never given. And so we have to, like, I believe it would be so different if our world contained schools that taught people emotional intelligence, who taught people the powers of energy and the powers of, the way, like, even simple things. Yes, we say, sticks and stones may break your bones and words will never. It's like, no, words will hurt you.
Yeah.
You start with just really simple things. And what if you built upon giving people energy management and emotional management and taught them how to deal with stress and conflict? Like, how different would the world be if they had those tools?
Yeah.
So that's why I say, going back to the relationship, is one will get healthier. The other one will be left in this place for whatever reason. Either they don't have the tools, or they literally put their heels in the ground, just like you said. That's a possibility too. And they may have an emotional quotient where they feel like, if I admit that there's a different way, then I'm admitting I'm wrong. And so now pride, this is a whole nother thing, that sticking the heels is now an act of pride and defiance. And here's the interesting thing. I went through a divorce years ago. I'm talking to my counselor, and he said some really powerful, liberating words. He said, understand that people do what they do simply because that's the experience they're having, and it has nothing to do with you. It's not personal.
Mm-hmm.
It could have been a completely different person. They would have
Yeah.
treated them the exact same way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is the levels of psychology that we don't put into these equations.
Yeah.
So going back to the, this whole thing, there's, these two people going their separate ways, is if one doesn't have the tools, if they don't have someone in their lives, and this is where I think men oftentimes are at deficit here, is because they don't have the caliber and quality of calling you out on your bullshit kind of friends.
Yeah. Period.
End of statement. Right. And so there's articles that just came out just recently. I was reading one the other day, and it was talking about the loneliness factor and the lack of quality friends that most men don't possess.
Yeah.
And so we have this thing of isolation. So let me back up. This was the second thing I was going to bring to this whole story, is if we go back to like the 1800s and prior, there were farms, there were cultures, there were communities that were built around collaboration.
Yeah.
They were built around that word community.
Yeah.
They were built around us working with one another.
Barn raising. Let's just, everyone needed a barn. You needed your neighbors.
Just go help make it happen, right? So
Yeah.
all of this combined. And then we get to the Industrial Revolution, and there was commerce, and there was all these different things coming online, and people were taken from those communities and doing these 10, 12, 14-hour, labor and tasks, and separate into these more urban environments. And now you have, let's say, the patriarchal, and sadly, this is what the state we were in at that time. All those men were taken from their families in those contexts, and they were put to work, and then they get done and they get exhausted. And, whereas today we go have beers with friends, like they were just separated. Maybe there was that, but it was just the separation just by itself of their work days. You add war into all that. You add the Spanish flu and the Depression, and then more war. And what we find is more and more males, millions upon millions of males, checked out, either by death or by proxy. They just weren't present. So now we have women left to carry the load of their families. And so they're operating in these two dimensions, these energies and what have you. Then they raise children who are under this one tandem's, energetic state, and don't even understand how to administer their own, as the poor young boys don't know how to administer themselves, and it's never been modeled. They were never christened. They were never given some kind of conscious understanding. I was a boy and now I'm a man. Like all these routines, rituals, all evaporated. Yeah. And we did that generation 1, generation 2, and now we're in generation 3, going on to generation 4, separation from our family. So women are exhausted, and rightfully so, also angry. And some way, somehow they got cheated out of the deal in so many of these other areas of being rewarded for the things that they did sacrifice for their time, for their work, for in the workplace, getting paid in equitable, realms, getting honored in equitable realms. All those different things compounded. And now we have men who don't really know how to be men, and women who are sick and tired of having to carry so much load.
And men and grandparents and fathers and grandfathers who don't know how to raise sons.
Yep. And so it's no surprise that we have these generational separations, particularly around men, who the grandfathers shake their head at their sons and, even more so for their grandsons. And they're like, you're just not meeting an expectation. You're not good at only further emphasizing some level of performance.
Or, I mean, in
This
many ways, like embodying a principle,
yeah.
right? Like this is the patriarchal principle, and it might go, it's ancestral, it's special to some degree, and it's like you're not embodying that. I mean, there's so many levels of.
So then we add this last piece is the world we live in doesn't even fit the models of all those things over those last 3-4 generations. So now the model has changed. So the world we live in demands of us a different approach for so many things. I'm not going to go try and untangle that mess. Just the eggs are scrambled and we're not getting them back, right? We just have to figure out how do we navigate us. And so where men now have to step into is this place of intention. They can't show up for things they don't know how to show up for. But every man wants to show up for something. So in some ways, we can play into the performance from a healthy state that says now the opportunity, the invitation for you is to be in this place of support and power, but not for dominion and authority and domination. Two completely different powers on completely different axis of this thing I have in my hands. You who are listening at home have no idea what I'm doing. But the opposites of the spectrum. How's that? So on one end of the spectrum, we have, this power looks like domination, toxicity, and all these different things. And on the other end, it's just like, the giving up and not knowing what to do and all this. And in here is the man needs to evolve to understand like all the principles that are necessary today are found in getting in touch with who you are and what you want primary, and then developing the identity of the man who is capable of doing those things you see in your heart. You can have it in your heart and not think that you're qualified. Like I said, you can have a vision, but think that you're not worthy, not deserving, and don't have what it takes. And so we have to bridge those two. And once we do that, we create men who have this incredible capacity to be present, to love, and to lead in ways that are healthy and whole and equitable.
Yeah. You have to act it out.
Nothing to prove, nothing to lose.
Yeah. That sounds right. That sounds like the seed of the creator. Yeah. So why do men, I'm going to use the word finally, like double underline, seek coaching, like seek help? What's your experience of that?
So my job's hard in the context of getting men. Like I know beyond a shout out, I could do coaching in other realms and probably make a bazillion dollars. But because my focus is on men, it's a lot harder to stimulate them to a place of safety. It's like we were saying before, like men believe that their vulnerability or transparency will be perceived or rather weaponized by some competition. Again, it could be a colleague, they're bored, they're investors. Someone's going to see them as foolish or incompatible or, untrustworthy or, they're unstable. Oh my gosh, that guy, he shows emotion, he's unstable. It's like we put these labels as the society that all these different things.
And like super exemplified in high level corporate culture is what I'm hearing in that.
Yes. And so now you dare not tell anyone that you're under stress, in anxiety. You don't tell anyone that you are feeling underqualified or that you need help or assistance, or that you even would want a coach, a mentor, or assistance of any sort, because that can be perceived in your own, this cultural, context, that somebody somewhere they'll sniff wind of that and use it against us. And so men further isolate, and in isolation, everything seems normal. So in that isolation, we think whatever I'm feeling is normal. So I'm feeling it. And to stack on even worse, I'm the only one feeling it.
Yeah.
So if I'm struggling with addiction and I'm, in some kind of self-hatred, if I'm in some place of, telling all the world like what I really feel, now I can become very dangerous to myself or to other people, not in a violent way, but in a way that you can no longer serve people in the way that you can. So now all of a sudden your kids are making a little noise and you snap at them and you break their hearts.
Mhm.
Shut, I'm just trying to concentrate. To your partner, like, would you just leave me alone? We have these outbursts of rage, and the damage that is done in those little micro conflicts
Mhm.
grows and creates even more divide. And so what does the man do? Gets even more isolated.
Mhm.
And they can't even reach the demands and help the people around them anymore because they can't even help themselves. So how do I get a hold of those guys? I need to tell my story more. I need more guys who do what I do. We need to normalize this shit. We need to get it out into the marketplace, and we need to like finish my fucking book and
Yeah.
push it to the masses, because
Yeah.
what this is going to do for
Yeah.
families and relationships and for businesses can be massively profound.
Oh yeah. Well, it's like, yeah. So what's I mean, one thing that's just insanely fascinating to me is that both like some of the men I've met who lead larger corporations always have a business coach, always have a business life coach. And then women entrepreneurs at the really low levels, like maybe breaking 100K, like maybe getting into multiple six figures.
Yeah.
Definitely by the time they reach 500,000, like they all have coaches super early on, and it's considered prestige. It's like, of course I have a coach. Like I'm worth it. I mean, so it's like we have these two groups, like this little tiny group of super high performing men who like get that they don't have a life without a coach. Like they will sacrifice some core holistic component of being a man. And then we've got all these women who are just like, of course I would do that. And then you have this whole category of men who have no idea
Yeah.
that what a coach could do for their everyday life experience.
And yet they're fans of people who have multiple coaches. Every athlete, every actor, everywhere has a voice coach, has a presentation coach, has a drama coach or whatever. They have one for television, one for stage. Then you go to all the athletes. Like great athletes going to have a conditioning coach. They're going to have a nutrition coach. They're going to have whatever their mindset coaches. They're going to have all these different people who are teaching them, showing them, and fast tracking them, collapsing time to make them far more potent, far more powerful in a faster sense of the word. Like, I don't understand why. Gentlemen.
Well, I mean, and to what you said earlier, like the getting left behind for me and Winston, it's like the female can't do the job. Like the partner can't. It very much always has to be an externalized relationship. So like for me to have my coach and then Winston not to have a coach, or do that level of, or a mastermind group that's just totally separate world for me than coaching. Like to not have these high powered holistic growth relationships that get the multidimensional goal aspect of life and being in the creator, right? And understanding that like isolation isn't a working strategy. Alone time is like activated thinking time in the thinking life, and alone time, like, yes, but that's really different than isolation. That like groups evolve faster than individuals, collective, like whether it's barn raising or going on the hunt, like something else happens, a mastermind is created, a third thing arises, a whole other level of being a human being, which is one of the highest levels of our beingness, is this collective action. Like that doesn't get activated at all unless, right? And so that bridge of like women insisting that men have coaches. I just want to put that, because this is going to be listened to by 95% of women, and they're going to send it to their men. And if it's like, well, what if instead of having the same old conversations, like, what if, like, what's beyond the wildest dream?
Yeah.
Like what if we just put our investment into that and took it out of whatever the fuck we've got to take it out of, because that's worth more.
Yep. Yep. And that's the whole point, right? Is getting to that place where men, you don't even know what's possible. In the same way that we just talked about ignorance, we talk about not having tools. Like if a man just got, I'll tell you, for example, I'm here in my apartment and I'm in Lisbon, Portugal, and I'm not at home where I have my garage filled with all of my power tools. And so I have a table I'm putting together. I have these Allen wrench and I have to twist it by hand. And I'm like, what kind of archaic bullshit is this? But it's what I have to do, because if I just had my drill and I just pull it out, I have a bit and it has a tool that can fit in there and I'm done. No, I'm sitting here for 20 minutes and the inside of my fingers are all sore because I don't have the right tools. How fast your life can spin on a dime when you have the right tools, you can get the job done. Transformation in your life is nothing more than having context of tools that help you advance your understanding, advance your yielding, advance your letting go. And suddenly you're more powerful, more agile, more fiscally sound than you ever thought possible, because you simply didn't have the tools before. And now someone put this tool in your hand and you can make magic happen. Furthermore, most of us already have these intrinsic skills and gifts and realities inside of us that, once matched and aligned with said tool, becomes like our magic wand to make even more incredible things happen.
Yeah.
But because we don't choose to get out of the world that we currently know and give ourselves permission, and that's really what it is, giving yourself permission to understand there might be a different way. This morning, I'm talking to a 30-year-old guy from Texas, and we walked out of our language class together, and I was like, hey, it's nice to see another American. Like, hey, how are you here? He's like, well, yeah, why are you here? I'm like, yeah, America. He's like, me too. And so we're like, oh, how'd you get here? What are you doing? And he said, I came on a D7 visa as an entrepreneur and as a nomadic. I can run my business from anywhere in the world. We choose Lisbon. Awesome. Cool. What about you? And this 30-year-old guy says, well, I just decided that I wanted to see the world differently. And so I just got a student visa to study Portuguese. I had visited here on a trip years ago and thought this would be a cool place to come back to. And so he got creative and he decided he was going to do that. I was like, you know what? Very few, and this is no diss or dig on Americans. This is a general human nature. But when I might tell my friends I moved here, they're like, oh, how'd you do that?
Yeah.
And I used to, over the last 2 months, I would start these emails with, well, first there's the D7 visa, there's an NHR law, and I start explaining some of the matriculate, kind of details. And like, no. I mean, how did you do it? And what they're saying is, you broke the rules. How did you push back? And then they say, you're so courageous, you're so brave, and they have this label upon it.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what do you want? Do you want to experience something different? Do you want to have the freedom to not live in the bubble that you're in? And I mean freedom, not from I'm a patriot freedom. I'm just mean freedom, like the freedom of choice, like to do what you want, where you want. Because if that's the case, then it's simply a choice. And this is the same thing in our own lives. Is transformation is nothing more than small permission slips, small choices to say, I'm giving myself permission to change. I'm giving myself permission to be wrong. I'm giving myself permission to explore. I'm giving myself permission to be creative. I'm giving myself permission. And in that permission is all the power you need.
Yeah, it's so interesting because that permissibility has really been associated with the feminine, So like, I mean, women still have issues with it. Women, they have an opposite issue, which is really interesting. Men don't have, I don't find this issue as much as like actually they've been permissive. They figure out their thing, their it, and then they have to like crown themselves. Like they have to actually acknowledge that this is who I am. This is how I'm going to show up without needing other people to validate that. Like they have to it's very similar to the permission thing, but they have to self-validate. Like they have to put the crown on their own. They have to self-coronate, right? And that's harder for women because it's a masculine, and just being permissive with growth is so it is so core. I love.
There's two things that I kind of like just came to me as you were saying it. One is fear and the other one is guilt. So men rarely give themselves permission because of some kind of fear. They're afraid to lose what they've built. They're afraid to lose reputation. They're afraid that they'll feel like they're starting all over. They'll fear that they're going to look like an idiot. All that's based in fear. And I think for women, a lot of times is they actually have this capacity, but there's this weird guilt thing. Like if I do this, my kids might get cheated of time with me. My spouse won't get this. Like my girlfriends will think that like there's this weird guilt thing.
Mm-hmm.
And those are like these two like horrible emotions that plague our world. Right?
Yeah.
Because guys, like we get motivated by guilt. It's really disgusting. It's kind of like eighth grade football team, shame and guilt. It's like, come on, you pussy, get up there, you know, whatever. And like, yeah, I'm gonna do it, coach. I'm gonna do it, yeah. And then we do the same thing in the workplace. Like, come on, you saying you get, and that we go right back to eighth grade on the football team. Like, okay, I'm gonna do it, coach. I got this. It's like guilt and shame. Like guys, we navigate that in the weirdest, diametrically disgusting ways. And for women, like that's detrimental. That's super painful.
Yeah.
You
know? Yeah.
But women will like, oh, I'm going to go in childbirth and I'm going to go natural. Like you just said, and like, isn't that going to hurt? It's like, I'm fearless. I got this. I was born. I'm going to do it. And they walk into these situations of all sorts of unknown about child rearing, about business, about like homes and about all these things. Women are fearless. And then guys sometimes get some of the simplest things like, about that.
Well, they have so much more, there's so much more permission to explore. You know, it's funny, there's this article, and I know we've got to wrap this up, but we could probably talk forever. There's this article in the New York Times a couple weeks ago. So I'm thinking it's like June 2020. And it was on like why Jewish girls succeed. And my father's Jewish, my mother's Catholic. And then I married into my husband comes from a Mormon family and he's black sheep. So there's just a lot of, we live in a lot of different belief systems and paradigms and blah, blah, blah. So one thing I've noticed about, and I've worked globally for a long time. And before my global community, my background was in international relations and international policy. And I've always been fascinated by different people and paradigms and archetypes over time. So all that said, you know, we have this idea of who we are, right? And then who we want to be. And it's so culturally permeated, right? When it's like, there's really a blank canvas. And so in this blank canvas, then we just see like that we're in the boxes or we're in these labels and we're in these machinations over time that disempower us. And with women going towards, like there's a permission to explore in the feminine, right? And then you're saying in the masculine, there's a permission to perform, right? And so women physiologically, because if they're interested in not medicating, and if their worm's their power source, they're going to explore new levels of terrain, literally biological terrain, right? And it's a little bit easier because men are medicated for other things. And women, a lot of women are medicated for this and they don't do the exploration, right? So medication gets caught up in the technology, we'll say. And then it malfunctions or degenerates. More or less is degenerating right now. So in the peak performers, there's this like big opportunity to evolve through the physiology. If for the women who are like, I'm curious what this phase of life is, whether it's menarche, whether it's sexual power, whether it's motherhood or conception into motherhood, into every child as a redefinition of the mother, right? As who am I now, right? So there's constant biologically driven self reinvention to then perimenopause in the second half of life, in which like the sky's really the limit as far as like consciousness is concerned, because now a lot of your power, if your womb's been your power source, like you have so much more energy really available because you're no longer in child producing years. So you've got this like, and you know, and you get it because you got to go through all those biological, physiological, higher order evolutions of your self reinvention and consciousness. And now it's like, okay, you're kind of free of that, and you're kind of free of societal construct. If you've done it right, like you're now post-societal, post-cultural construct, is the question is like, what's next? And so for men, like I'm super curious because it's like, there's gotta be through the rites of passage ceremonies and these coming back in, right? If we look over time, the hunt, right? The hunt is the oldest one we've got. And it was continual rite of passage consciousness raising activities for men that kind of mimic the same pattern for women. And what I'm hearing from you is like, we've got to kind of at some level reinvent the hunt.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that that's true. And it's like giving a different context and different form of understanding. And there's so many layers I'm thinking about right now. And this, again, if we're trying to bring this conversation in for a landing, suffice to say, it's our opportunity to evolve. It's just that simple. And women are coming to a place, I think, that they've been able to evolve easier and faster for whatever reason. And I think most of it has to do because they had to, given, the kind of the context I shared before. And men are needing to be invited to. And that invitation comes best from another man.
Yes.
And
Totally.
until men are willing to go forward, there was 3 C-suite men that I've approached in the last 2 weeks to do an interview with me, both for research for my book and for my podcast. And all 3 of them said, "Hey, Angus, I'll talk to you about this stuff all day long, you and me. I cannot go on record. I cannot have these conversations, outside. I'll keep that between me and my colleagues." And one of them, I wrote back because I was closer to him, and I was like, "Hey, look, no judgment, no harm, no foul. I just want you to know, first off, absolutely no judgment. And this is the reason why we're still in this situation, all of us, is because until a man can show himself vulnerable, he cannot give other men to give permission to do the same."
I would have called him a pussy.
Good callback. Good callback. Nice. And that's really what it is. It's like, dude, and again, it's the conditioning of the circumstance. And if that guy was retired, if he was, not consulting, or if he wasn't, in the game, he might be far more inclined to have that conversation. But because he's still in the game, he's not interested in having it being weaponized.
Yeah. Everybody, this has been Angus Nelson with evolvemen.us, even though he's global. Awesome. We'll continue this conversation at another time.
And there's 4 mountains that we have this thing. I would love to have.
Yeah, share whatever you want to share, please.
Women who have a man, they're facing some kind of conflict. There's something that's there, and I'll send you the link. Maybe you can just put it on your
show notes.
Your show notes. I don't have a fancy URL for it off the top of my head. I just know it's at typeform.com/4mountains. I'll send you the link. Yeah. And you can go to that link and have your significant man go and fill it out, and it will tell them one of four areas that every man is trying to conquer. And we put it in this metaphor of the mountain is because that's the way they see it. It's something that they're going to have to go up. And our philosophy is no one climbs a mountain alone. You have a Sherpa, you have a team, and every level of that mountain, you're going to need different tools, and you're going to need different wisdom and insights. And so each one of these mountains requires different tools and different people. And this is a very enlightening assessment that we've created for men to be able to see, like, oh, this is why I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing. And from the surface, we could say, well, of course, duh. Oh, you know this. But the way that we've couched this is we put it into these micro moments of the experiences men go through that help them feel or to see the emotions that are being expressed. And it might be in this area, it might be in this area, it might be in this area. You'll have to take the assessment to find out. But I'll send that link to you to make sure.
Awesome, you guys, and we'll put that in the show notes. That sounds like a really great place to start. Yay, Angus.
Thanks so much for having me. It's so fun, Kate.
Oh, my pleasure.